Well, welcome, Soraya Latiff. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're really excited to have you. Can you share a little bit about yourself and about your background at the University of Colorado in Boulder?
Thank you, Katie. I'm a CU Boulder alum, so I graduated in 2017, and I studied international affairs and global environmental affairs at CU. And when I graduated, I was part of a program called Public Achievement as an undergraduate student. I was a coach for 1 year and then a teaching assistant my senior year. And through an AmeriCorps position, the national service, I was able to work for public achievement as a national service volunteer following my senior year directly out of college. And this is, a program that I was working for because my self-interest was in working with young people through PA. But kind of luckily, in a sense, I got to also be a part of AmeriCorps, which is similar to a domestic Peace Corps, if any of you are familiar with Peace Corps. And a lot of different AmeriCorps are various ages, mostly people who've just graduated out of college to folks who are just in the community looking to serve and through public service. And I was lucky to kind of have both. So through that year in AmeriCorps with Public Achievement, my center that I also work for as a part of Public Achievement, it's called the Center for Community-Based Research and Learning at CU Boulder. And they essentially piecemealed a role for me to keep me and as a full-time staff member. So I got to help with various projects my following year once I was fully staffed. And I was the program coordinator of the Public Achievement Program now, and also helping with communications at our center, helping with the Leadership Studies program at our center. And also I got to work with a new group of young people, all college-age students, through Hoekstra Scholars, which is a scholarship that started in Colorado that is specifically geared towards students who are interested in taking on their own social justice research and projects throughout their 4 years in college. And they were mostly first generation students of color. So I did that my second year at CU as a staff member. And then my third year, different roles again, public achievement being the main primary role. And then this year, I'm the assistant director of the public achievement program and the communications manager for the Center for Community-Based Research and Learning, as we like to call it, CU Engage. So the center has not only public achievement as a program, but 12 other programs that also all do community-based research. They're working in the community in some capacity. And many of our programs also work directly with a lot of first-generation students of color and are all engaged in some kind of economic justice, social justice work.
That's fabulous. I love that you had this passion and followed that, and then a role was created because of your passion and the energy that you brought to it. And that's very cool. And could you share a little bit about your AmeriCorps experience? I believe you got to travel abroad as well.
Yes, so I actually traveled right after I graduated. So 2 days after graduating from CU Boulder, I went to Tanzania in East Africa for a month. And that was separate from my AmeriCorps experience, but I highly recommend if you are able to access an experience like that. Personally, for me, because I grew up out of the States, I hadn't yet sought study abroad programs because, in a sense, like me coming to CU Boulder and attending this four-year college was my own version of study abroad in some ways. And also I was paying for school throughout my time at CU. So financially, it wasn't as feasible to try to fit in study abroad throughout school. But I had a really good relationship with a first year professor who's an anthropologist who works and researches in Tanzania every year prior to COVID-19. And she set up a sort of study abroad Maymester program and found me at the start of the school year and was like, I don't want you to leave until you've participated in this with me. And what's really cool about that experience is that it really aligned with a lot of my values. And also so much of the work I do is relationship based. And had I not had that relationship with her, I might not have been able to make that kind of trip happen. So I had the chance to go to Tanzania with her, and we stayed and lived with 3 of the different indigenous tribes there in East Africa. And we were there for a month, just camping outside, participating in community work, community labor, community research. And when I came back, I started my AmeriCorps training. And what is really awesome about AmeriCorps is that I think a lot of different people from a lot of different places come to a specific location in order to take on working for a organization in that area. So there were actually a lot of people who were part of my AmeriCorps cohort of about 30 people who were from out of state and had all just recently graduated and were coming in with really different experiences and a kind of unifying value around public service. So I've made some of like my best friends through being in AmeriCorps because it was coming out of college. You know, you're reconnecting with yourself. What are your values? What do you hope to do? And it's such a rich time to meet some of the foundational relationships in your adult life that might look different from high school or college. And my AmeriCorps role was really unique because of all of my colleagues worked for the I Have a Dream Foundation in Boulder County. And I worked specifically as a program coordinator for one of our partner sites, which was luckily Public Achievement at CU Boulder. So I was sort of like strategically hired so that I could work for PA, but I got this broader AmeriCorps experience. And as an AmeriCorps member, you are part of a national service organization. So you are connected to all these broad networks of folks intergenerationally, meaning young, old, and so on, who are committed to these values of public service across the country and across the United States. So we had the chance to attend national conferences in Baltimore and DC and meet other people of all walks of life, of modalities of life, who were committed to public service in some unique way in different parts of the country. And then also, if you do AmeriCorps and you decide to pursue it, you have the opportunity to achieve a education stipend and an education award. So you can have essentially a scholarship to put towards either student loans that maybe you've accumulated through previous studies or towards any higher education. So right now I'm also in graduate school while I'm working, and I'm able to use some of that education award towards my graduate studies, which is really helpful for higher education beyond your undergrad, especially.
Wow, that's amazing. You know, one thing I think is so cool about your story is it seems like there's this common theme, and one thing rolls over into the next. They just kind of build upon each other, feed upon each other, and are pushing you in this direction that really lets your potential shine. Do you feel the same way when you think about your story?
I've connected with that more intimately this year, and I'm not sure quite yet what it is about this year. There's so much that has been occurring, so much to learn from, and so much to respond and act to. And I think that I have also been able to spend more time sitting with myself and taking in the value of my experiences in ways that I hadn't before, because I tend to be somebody who's always on the go, always busy, always showing up, and quite frankly, usually always doing too many things at once and not taking pause to celebrate what has been happening for me, or like relax and rest, right? These things that are kind of essential components to us being strong people in our lives. So I think that I've taken some time to reflect on that and how lucky I've been at an early enough age to recognize how crucial it is to know what your values are and how important relationships are, and sort of how those are the things you can't always plan around, of not knowing what might emerge in terms of opportunities based off of those like foundational things. So that has been such a key part of the last few years for me, for sure.
Yeah, that's really special that you get that time now to reflect on that, and that you are being proactive about going through that reflection process. So, are you just figuring out your values through that process, or have you known your values for a while? And if so, how did you establish them? How do you figure out your values?
Yes, I love this question. So I really believe in the power of our stories and storytelling. And I think that often, we don't necessarily learn about the world through a system of values. We don't like take time to think about why am I in this classroom right now? Why am I showing up at this like job 40 hours a week? Why am I in relationship with this particular person? And we teach this in the work that I do. When we engage students at the start of our year, I work with 7th through college students. And actually, we also work with some doctoral and graduate students as well in Eagle Valley in Colorado. And we first ask them, let's identify what your core values are. Because if you haven't had to think about that before, able to sit down and take the time to navigate that, it is essential to know from what your values are, like what you're willing to commit your time to and like what you're willing to do in terms of your social justice work. Because without that connection, you're likely to burn out, you're likely to stop short, right? So we have folks look at their identities, meaning your cultural identity, your racial and ethnic identity, your socioeconomic status, the people around you that raised you, that built you, your schools, your family, your religious institutions. And then we also have folks look at what are the experiences that you've had in your life. And then lastly, what are some values as a result of the way I really like to tell students is, this is a little separate, but I have students look at the way that the world is and then the way that the world should be. And based on what their responses are in terms of what the world should be, I say, okay, clearly you care about freedom, right? Clearly you care about equality and equity because you're recognizing that that is not currently our status quo based on these issues that you're seeing in our immigration system, in our politics, around race and xenophobia. And the world that they imagine reflects those values. So we have everyone who works with us look at their identities, experiences, values, and experiences in terms of, have you ever had an experience that maybe violated some of those values that has taught you about the issues that you, as a result, you care about? And then from there, we have our core values. When we look at all those things, all these parts that have made us who we are, the actions we've maybe witnessed ourselves take or not take, but we wanted to, we know what we care about. So I think that's like through teaching and leading some of this work, it's helped me have a framework for that where I can help other people land at that. But I wouldn't say that prior to leading PA that I knew how to arrive at that, right? I didn't have that kind of way to break it down, if you will, but we all have values. It's just a human inherent thing. So we often talk about emotions as well and how our emotions teach us our values oftentimes, and seeing our emotions as information. So I think that when I think of it that way, I can recognize that from immigrating from a place like Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, where I grew up multicultural, multi-ethnic, multiracial, celebrating various religious holidays and traditions, attending a school that was a Catholic primary school and coming home and witnessing my grandparents reading namaz like as part of an Islamic household, to dressing up and playing carnival the next day with my mom. Like I had that experience that was so vibrant and enriching and intersectional. And to take that and move to the US where I witnessed I wasn't able to fully express myself in all these ways because there's not as much enriched multiculturality here yet. Like we have folks who are here who are so diverse from so many different places, but we don't quite yet have the structures in place to grant equity, dignity, and equality to all of the people who live and reside here in the United States. So I think that my roots gave me those values of equity, justice, dignity, and honestly, in some sense, like love and joy, right? That fuel my ability to show up in the work that I do. But I was able to sort of like identify what those were and make sense of it through learning how to connect to my identities, experiences, and values through my job as a young adult.
That's fabulous. And have you seen a shift in the students you're working with or within yourself once there is that recognition of their values?
Absolutely. Our students, again, like range from 7th to college age. And it's, there is some magic when you're speaking to someone as young as 7th grade and sort of in conversation with them saying, well, actually, everything you've experienced up until now has significance, right? It matters. It shapes your ability to be here and it influences your family and your community. And like that is so that is so lost in terms of how we tend to regard young people all too often. And it's not something I would ever have been able to recite to myself when I was that young, thinking that, oh, I have only arrived at this age, at this grade in school, at this place in my life, and that has meaning, right? Like I can contribute, I can take action. So I think watching that spark every time it happens is so significant, and it certainly is a shift. Because especially since we work within schools and within school systems, and a lot of students aren't accustomed to folks coming in and engaging them that way. Typically, especially in this online world, we've heard from students again that, oh, I haven't been asked to speak in a really long time. I haven't been asked to share what I'm feeling, what I'm processing, what I, feel fired up about. And all of those limitations are also understandable given the circumstances that we're under in terms of how classrooms are set up right now, but it feels even more important to have those conversations with them and engage them that way. And I also definitely felt the shift in myself. I think that all the things that I do outside of this space with my work at CU Boulder and outside of public achievement has been strongly influenced by my ability to understand what my values are and understand that my story has value and matters as well, because everything about my experiences before coming into public achievement did not teach me that. I had, still struggle with things like imposter syndrome and not being able to believe in myself as a young woman of color. And you really have to do so much of shifting the narratives you've been told as a young person, especially living here and migrating here. And it takes a lot of work to do so. But I feel so much more, even though it's still work that I have to do, I do feel incredibly empowered with the capacity to, everything I do now relates back to my values. And I have that ability and kind of that empowerment through helping guide this work that we're doing through PA. And I get little moments of reinforcement, if you will, when I then get to sit and listen to a 7th grade student talk to me about why their culture matters and how that's going to shape their purpose and their passion, how this Black Lives Matter movement this year is shaping their purpose and their passion and teaching them that they have so much more value than they thought. And I know I'm using value interchangeably there. So values that we have, and then also like the significance and the dignity of who we are to exist and act on our values.
That is so special. I love those moments when that spark happens and you get to see an individual recognize their value, recognize the meaning and the beauty of their own story. So thank you for diving deeper into that. I'm going to switch a little bit here. I'd love to hear about your TED Talk that you just gave for CU, the 6 Lessons in Youth Activism. Can you dive deeper into that in terms of what was it like to give a TED Talk? What inspired you to do this? And what's the message that you're trying to get out and its importance?
Yes. So I haven't really talked about this part of the story coming into the TED Talk, but essentially someone who was visiting from another university campus met with myself and my colleagues early this year, pre-COVID-19. This is around February. And essentially said, I would love to see a TED Talk from you. I want more of this. How can we capture this? And I was like, oh, I'm not sure. And she sort of pitched I think you should. So I filled out the application for TED, and they actually said no. And I was like, all right, that's great. On to the next thing. And a week before essentially the first full rehearsal in March of the TED event in Boulder, one of the directors reached out to me and essentially said, we're missing you, we're missing this. And can you put together a talk in 3 days? And I just kind of went for it and drafted what I could. And everyone else who participated in TED this year actually went through a series of auditions in order to achieve that spot on stage. And they had hundreds of applications, and they auditioned and refined this process so much and so meticulously. And then for me, it was just actually we said no to you, but now we're saying yes. Can you put this together? And I showed up at the rehearsal and felt again, who am I to be here? Like, they told me no. You know, I'm not like these other talks, like, I probably won't be as good. And the result of that ended up being that they valued my talk so much that they gave me the longest time slot. They placed me at the end to close out the entire event. And I think that was such an important lesson of, you know, someone might tell you no, and that doesn't mean that you don't have value or like a place on that stage. And I hadn't even processed that until like the very end, last minute, cameras off at the end of the event, because everyone was reflecting on all the auditions and all of the work on the talks and, you know, how long the process was. And I was just like, you just had me show up, you know, and you trusted me after saying no. And you know, folks can't always see what might have value through the lens that they're looking at it through. And sometimes it just takes time and the right moment to come into place for that yes to come versus that no. So that's how I ended up being part of TED. And the talk itself is a sort of, I weave together stories of my own childhood, my own experiences, and a lot of stories that were more just like dialogue between myself and a younger student at some point. And most of those stories were actually from years ago because they just stood out to me. A lot of them were from my first year as an AmeriCorps member in PA. And I have an abundance of stories to tell since, but for some reason, like those felt like the ones that made sense. And when I first wrote the talk, I had 12 lessons and I had to cut it down to 6 because of time, because you can only have up to a 20-minute talk. And I just really worked to interweave and other lessons that I had into the was telling the story. And I think that, you know, another truth about the talk is that it was written in March. It was written before COVID-19. It was written before the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement this summer. And a lot of the lessons, I was actually nervous that they might not have been my message to tell now that so much time has passed. And I really had to trust myself that I wrote something that I still felt confident about delivering. And I do that at the end where I kind of break from the talk and say, you know, here's the context of time and how it's passed and how this looks different, but also how it looks the same, because injustice is so salient, right? It has been here for a very long time. And that's not just as a result of COVID-19 or Black Lives Matter movement this summer. And these lessons are for everybody, because until we are able to tap into the experiences of those who maybe you can't ever get proximate to, which is why we have so much division right now, we won't be able to change what's happening, right? We've been pushing through in this way for so long. So I think that where I get hope every day, and I understand that not a lot of people have the opportunity and the gift and the privilege to be close to this kind of hope every day, is through witnessing young people take action on issues that often feel too large for other people. They feel too overwhelming, too heavy, and they're doing it with the foundation of knowing who they are and knowing that their identities have value. And I just think that bearing witness to that repeatedly, getting to be someone who's helping cultivate that space, is entirely hopeful, because it's generational growth. It's those young people who will have these skills, whether it's working on social justice or running a business in, 10 to 20 years, like they will carry those values through what they're doing. And I just see an immense lack of that in a lot of our older generation who are in our politics, who are making decisions right now. And I think, like, imagine if everyone had the capacity to learn about their agency at a younger age, if they understood that who they are and what has built them matters, even in a society that has often said the opposite to them. So that was the hope and the message in terms of translating some of these things that, again, someone as young as 7th grade is getting to learn and be exposed to, that so many older folks in my life don't know about and never came into contact with, right? And have lived their lives through not knowing how to think about these things, how to do these things, how to see that they have capacity to act and to change what is going on around us. So that was the hope in putting out the message.
That's fabulous. And so what would you say to anyone who is able to understand their own story and their own potential and is saying, I'm ready, I want to be a young leader in action, I want to get out there, I want to be an activist for the things that I care about? What's my first step?
Like if you are already there, I take it that you feel and embody this, but just keep coming back to why. Like keep coming back to why you want to take action. Like without that why, you might not be able to sustain what you're attempting to do. So be clear on what is your purpose, like what experiences have led you to be standing here in this moment in October 2020 and willing to step outside, willing to take action, willing to show up, and willing to do some work that has not traditionally maybe been asked of you or expected of you. Why is that? Is it because you have had a firsthand experience with something that you disagree with and that you think is just fundamentally unjust? Is it because you have a loved one that you care about who you've witnessed them being treated unjustly? Is it because you have an immigration story that maybe you haven't asked your parents about that you should know? It's like do that investigative work in your own life and arrive at your why, because not only does that help you keep fueled to keep going, but it also enables other people who see what you're doing, who connect with you, who are in community with you, to be brought into the work with you. Because we do not do any action alone, not really. So you have to be able to communicate to others around you why it is you're doing what you're doing, because that helps them understand, but it also helps them come to terms with, oh, I care about this too, right? Like I have experiences like that as well. I've never thought about it that way, but that now you're mobilizing me. And that is that is so much of what community organizing is. It's relational in that way, because as one of us understands how to better navigate the reasons that have led us to arrive at doing any type of social justice work, organizing work, political work, it other people watching us, other people close to us learn from that as well. And then they navigate their own stories. And we also are able to better address issues more fully, because, you know, we don't live single issue lives. There's so many things that are impacting all of us at once, but we also can't address everything on our own. So it really matters to have a community of people around you who also have different things that are impacting them. And you get to see that, oh, like my friend is going to work on this issue and I'm going to work on this one. And I can trust that while I really care about the climate crisis, I can't take that on and maybe Black Lives Matter right now, but I know somebody and I trust somebody and I'm in the community with someone who is addressing like what waste management looks like in my community, because it's really bad right now, right? And I can step away and like address the racial justice work that I want to do this week. And I just think that it is so imperative, and you are so rarely alone in wanting to do that work, but too often folks don't know how to start or who to look for and who to look to. So enable your story and enable your like values and you figuring out what that why is, to mobilize and encourage other people around you to do the same.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing you say is when we understand our own why, that almost gives permission and provides a role model for other people to not only understand their own why, but then act upon it and go out and express that care for whatever it is that's speaking to them. And then that creates this interlocked community of people who can care about separate issues, but we're all in alignment with ourselves and with each other. And that provides like a network where we can trust and know that these things are getting taken care of.
Yes, absolutely. The only other thing I would say is that how we participate in this kind of work looks different for everyone. And there are so many different, you know, roles and movements, as we like to say. There are people who are, you know, doing the dreaming and the visioning. There are people who are leading the protests. There are people who are healing and showing up and teaching us and reminding us how to nurture ourselves while we want to do this kind of activism work, want to do this kind of public work. And I also think that as you grow and you develop and you find things that, you know, oh, I really care about the arts and I want to dance, like how does that relate back? Like there are always ways to do anything that you choose to do through a lens of equity and through a lens of your values. And I've really come home to that this year, because I have, you know, I teach yoga, I have a jewelry business, I have another role at CU Engage, I'm in grad school, and like there's this weave of values that go through that for me that enable me to do all those things. I don't do any of those things in isolation of showing up with the things that I care about in all those spaces. So just encouraging you and reminding you that no matter what you choose to do, there is always a way to do it through a lens of your values and equity, and creating those spaces and changing those spaces, because every space needs that work right now.
So, what's something that you have struggled with in your life, and how have you overcome that? Or maybe you didn't overcome it and you're still working through it right now?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that I work through as just being like one of the youngest people in my center, and typically being like one of the only women and women of color in a lot of spaces, even if those are digital now, outside of my work, through my work, however that shows up for me. And I have really had to learn how to just trust myself and trust the wisdom and experiences that I have in spaces where maybe, you know, the person in the room is a 7-year-old man. And I think I have had a tendency in the past to just default to the fact that they know better. Like, I'll try to keep quiet, you know, no one's gonna want to listen to me. And I still see that rearing its head sometimes in my life, and I'm constantly working on that. But I think that one of the like markers of my young life was having a single mom who immigrated here from the Caribbean, and watching her, myself, and my younger sister survive so much to be here, in terms of who like my, you know, her partners were, who my father was like in our lives, and what we had to do to safely immigrate and also be here and stay here and thrive, has always guided me through, I can do this because I have to do this. I've had that mentality when I moved here of like, I have a younger sister to show up for. I have a mom to support. I'm going to do my best to learn as much as I can. And I think that that was like the marker of my like struggle, if you will, in terms of a common struggle that obviously had its, you know, it impacted college for me. It impacted high school. It certainly impacted post-college. And I know for a fact that it has, of course, like made me who I am in terms of how I'm able to show up for people. And also it has taught me hard lessons and learning how to better take care of myself in the process.
Yeah. A lot of people, especially the students that we work with, have those similar struggles. They're personal and different to each individual, but something that they have to overcome that has the potentiality to hold them back. What within your personality, within your upbringing, led you to take the route and attitude of, I can do this, I have to do this, I'm going to do this, versus being defeated by it?
Honestly, I think it was having a mom who's an entrepreneur and watching her really just, for lack of a better way to describe it, she's so scrappy, and we never went without a project. Like, my mom, if something failed, she would start another business and keep going. And we were always kind of like right by her side through those processes and through those projects. And I also witnessed this like kind of deconstruction of hierarchy in terms of like, oh, I can help my mom run this business while I'm 8 years old. Like, I can be by her side and help her with customer engagement. And, you know, watching her from a very early age, like learn how to also trust her experiences, because she's not someone with a college degree. She's not someone who had anybody else to really rely on. Like, she chose to move two young girls to the United States without ever having lived here. And I think that from like such an early age, I did not recognize it when I was a kid. I certainly didn't recognize it first sometime after that. But witnessing myself now and how, what I kind of fall back on when I do feel low, when I do experience any kind of, you know, doubt that is coming at me, I have to sit with the fact that there's like resilience in me as well, because I witnessed people in my life and my family, between my mom and my grandparents, act through resilience so often, so frequently. And I just don't think that that leaves us. I think that we we are built better because of the resilience that our family obviously had, because it influences our lives and the opportunities that we get. Like, I'm the first in my family to go to college or go to graduate school, and that's a direct result of choices that were made to support me by moving here, right? But at the same time, like, we learn from their resilience as well. And I think that has been an immense guiding force, even if it's quiet sometimes, because I still have to work through a lot of that, where, it shows up in both ways. It shows up in when you can do something, and like, maybe you should know that you can, and you choose to be silent and you don't say anything in the meeting, or you don't take on the project because you believe someone older than you should. And then on the other side of things, where you get asked to do something, and like, maybe other people around you who are all older and maybe more equipped didn't get asked, and then you're doubting yourself because, is that right? Like, who am I to do this? Who am I to show up? And it's a constant self-dialogue too. Like, you have to be able to trust yourself to have that conversation with yourself of when you're like asking, who am I to do this? You have to trust that so many people are consistently asking themselves that question, even well into the ends of their lives. And we are human beings, and we have to feel unfamiliar or maybe scary or challenging, but you have to just trust that someone was in your shoes before you, and someone is in your shoes today who has to do the same thing. And even if we are these supposed experts in our fields, we're constant learners, and we do not have this down. Hence why our world is in the state of affairs that it is. Like, we do not know everything collectively. So we all have a lot to keep learning, and that means that you can do the thing that is before you, and maybe it will be messy, maybe you won't do it perfectly, chances are it won't be perfect, but we learn from doing them, right? And then that opens up so many different things that you can't yet see. Like, I think me talking about my job experience is a good example of that, of saying yes to AmeriCorps was a risk. I needed to work a job that was hopefully going to make me some money to help pay off student loans, to help take care of my family back in Trinidad, to help support my sister. And it was a risk to do something like that. But through it, I had the chance to now help lead a program that I'm so incredibly passionate about, and that I can see the ripple effects of the work that we're doing together with these young people. So I will leave it at that.
Awesome. Thank you. I am so curious, though. I want to jump back. You are in school right now. You have several positions, running a jewelry business, being a yoga teacher. I mean, that's amazing. It takes a lot of strength and a lot of discipline to be able to manage all of those and put your heart into those. How do you do it?
I've never valued a planner as much as I have this year. Like, a physical planner, if it's not written down, like, I'm probably not going to show up. And luckily, like, that hasn't happened yet in the last few months. But I really have like this huge old school agenda, and I rely on it so much. And I also think that before this year, as I mentioned earlier, kind of a lot of the lessons that have come out of 2020 with the pandemic, the racial justice movement, our climate crisis, like, staying at home more, being at home in new ways. I have also learned that I have to plan in time to take care of myself, and I wouldn't do that before. I was your like poster child of, yes, I'll do that. Yes, sure. Yep, I can do everything, and like, never took pause. And I think that learning that lesson and learning how valuable and necessary it is to take rest has helped me be able to do all of these things. And also finding ways that also, rest doesn't look the same for everyone. Self-care does not look the same for everyone. So finding ways of taking care of myself, taking pause, nurturing myself, that also felt authentic to me. And I really love sharing things that I love with other people. It's just who I am. Like, I love giving gifts. I love, like, if I learn something, I want to send the book out to 10 people. Like, so I recognize that in myself. And I went to yoga because of my ancestry. I'm East Indian, Afro-Caribbean. Two of the places where yoga was originated are from like one region of Africa and Southeast Asia. And I spent a lot of time this year trying to reconnect to my like ancestral roots and who my family is and has been. And a lot of those stories are lost because of the slave trade, because of indentured servitude, and all these things that have happened over time. So I went back to yoga for that reason. And I also found that, wow, taking this hour every day to move and to breathe and to close my eyes and to exercise, all these things happening at once, really made a profound difference in my life. So I decided to do a teacher certification this summer. It was at the peak of all the protests and like mid-pandemic, and I questioned the choice immensely and walked through, I don't deserve to do this right now. I need to be, burning myself out. And I'm so glad that I made that choice. And I am able to now teach in ways that, help my community through not just my work, but like my best friends and like family who I haven't seen in years can take a yoga class now virtually. And we have dialogues every class. We talk about things that are happening. We share our stories. I introduce a concept from social justice. Like, I'm integrating that. And that's what I meant earlier too, when acknowledging when I need to rest, making space for that, and also having my values show up in all of these things that I'm doing. So it doesn't feel as though, oh my gosh, I have to do this thing today. There's really none of that for me. School can, of course, be that way. Grad school is no easy feat. But there's, I'm studying policy and leadership and law, and there's a ton of intersection in what I'm doing as well. So, and the same thing for the jewelry business. It's something that I get to connect with people through and share. So that's sort of how I keep it going, is having this common thread of recognizing that you can connect your values to all of your projects, and like the things that you're deciding to do are all your choice in some ways. And I've been extremely grateful and lucky to have worked so hard to have a core job and my core 9 to 5, if you will, being something that also nourishes me in some ways.
Awesome. So you mentioned sharing books. So real quick, I just want to ask, what book are you reading right now?
Okay, I'm reading like 7 books right now. I was doing a really good job at reading like one at a time and finishing them. But right now, let's see, I just started Toni Morrison, The Source of Self-Regard, and it's a collection of Toni Morrison's essays. And she does a lot of, talking about race and racism in America and storytelling, because obviously she's, like, in my opinion, one of the best storytellers of our time. And I also read a book that I like finished and got done with, is this one. It's On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, and it is a memoir to this young man's mother. And I related a lot to his like story of his upbringing with a single mom who was an immigrant. And it's also talking about his like queer identity and navigating that as an Asian American. And then lastly, my ultimate favorite book that I go to for quotes all the time is Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. This is an all-time favorite, and I am only bringing it up right now because I probably come back to it like once a year. And I got to meet Bryan Stevenson, and he signed a copy of one of these, but I was really nice and gave it to my mom, so I have just like my little scrappy copy. But he, founded the Equal Justice Initiative and is just one of my living heroes. So I come back to that book a lot. And other than that, lots of books for school, because we basically have like 2 books to read a week with grad school. So these are some of my recent favorites.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for joining me today. Soraya, you are so strong. You are such a powerhouse, and it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm just looking forward to seeing where you head into your future as a young leader. Any final words that you'd like to share?
I just think that, again, like maybe a lot of you watching and listening know this, but keep in mind that you have the capacity to reshape and redesign things when they are not functioning in a well way, and they're not functioning to really take care of people in our society. And don't accept and resign yourself to the status quo of the way things are. And yes, it might take a really long time, as we're witnessing right now with the year that we're in, but keep committed to that. And again, keep committed to it in whatever space you show up in, is that you do have capacity to influence and impact and reshape what is, for the better is the hopes. yeah, and just continue to be open, continue to be taking care of yourselves, and continue to be learning.
That's amazing. We'll leave it there.